The year is 878. We are in the kingdom of Wessex, in the south of what will one day be called England, but which, at this moment, is not England at all. There is no England in 878. There is a patchwork of Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, and in this year, almost all of them have already fallen to the most terrifying force of the age, the Vikings. For decades, the Norse have raided the coasts of Britain. But this is no longer a raid. A great heathen army has come to stay, to conquer, to settle. One by one, the ancient English kingdoms have been overrun. Northumbria has fallen. East Anglia has fallen, its king tortured and killed. Mercia has fallen. Only one kingdom still stands against the tide. Wessex. And in January of 878, even Wessex is brought to the very edge of annihilation. Its young king, a man named Alfred, is driven from his throne, hunted through the winter marshes, reduced to a fugitive hiding in the swamps with a handful of followers, while the Vikings ride freely across his shattered kingdom. This is the story of the single most important year in the history of England, the year it almost died, and the king who brought it back from the dead. The only king in all of English history to earn the title, the Great. Using advanced AI trained on the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, the biography of Alfred written by the Welsh monk Asa, who knew him personally, the archaeology of the period, and the work of modern historians, we have reconstructed the year that decided whether England would ever exist at all. To understand how close it came, we must understand the man at the centre of it. Alfred was never supposed to be king. He was the youngest of 5 sons of the King of Wessex, born around the year 849. With 4 older brothers ahead of him, his path seemed set for the church, not the throne. As a boy, he was sickly, devout, and intensely intellectual, in love with learning in an age when even many kings could not read. But the Vikings changed everything. One by one, in the brutal warfare of the 860s and 870s, Alfred's older brothers died. Several of them kings of Wessex in their turn, worn down by the relentless Viking onslaught. By 871, at around the age of 21, Alfred himself became king of Wessex, inheriting a crown that increasingly looked like a death sentence, ruling the last Anglo-Saxon kingdom still standing against an enemy that had devoured all the others. For the first years of his reign, Alfred held on by a thread. He fought the Vikings in a series of hard battles. He bought them off with payments of silver when he had to. He watched, helplessly, as the great heathen army carved up the rest of Britain and planted Norse settlers across the conquered kingdoms. By the mid-870s, an uneasy peace held in Wessex. The Vikings, led by a formidable warlord named Guthrum, had withdrawn to winter quarters. Alfred and his people allowed themselves to believe the worst might be over. They were catastrophically wrong. In the depths of winter, in early January of 878, Guthrum did the unthinkable. In an age when warfare almost always paused for the winter, when armies went home and kings let down their guard, Guthrum launched a surprise attack. He struck at the royal estate of Chippenham, where Alfred and his court were spending the Christmas season, probably in the days right after the great midwinter feast, when the king's household was relaxed, scattered, and unprepared. The attack was a disaster for Wessex. The royal stronghold was overrun, Alfred's army was shattered or scattered. The king himself barely escaped with his life, fleeing into the wild countryside with only a small band of loyal warriors and family. The rest of Wessex, seeing their king defeated and on the run, began to submit to the Vikings. Some nobles fled overseas, some made their peace with Guthrum. The last Anglo-Saxon kingdom was collapsing. Alfred, the last free Anglo-Saxon king in all of Britain, was now a hunted fugitive in his own land. What followed is one of the most famous episodes in English history, half history and half legend. Alfred fled into the Somerset Levels, a vast region of marshes, bogs, reed beds, and small islands of dry land in the southwest of his kingdom, a watery wilderness that the Vikings, with their horses and their ships, found almost impossible to penetrate. He established a hidden base on a small island in the marshes called Athelney, a scrap of dry ground surrounded by impassable swamp, reachable only by those who knew the secret paths. From this hideout, through the late winter and early spring of 878, Alfred and his small band waged a guerrilla war, raiding Viking positions, gathering intelligence, and, most importantly, sending out secret messengers to the surviving loyal men of Wessex, telling them that their king still lived and that he would call them to battle when the time was right. It is from this desperate period that the most famous legend of Alfred comes. The story, recorded in later centuries, tells that Alfred, in disguise and exhausted, took shelter in the humble hut of a peasant woman who did not recognize her king. She asked him to watch some cakes she was baking by the fire while she went about her work. Alfred, his mind consumed by the desperate plight of his kingdom, let the cakes burn, and the woman returned to scold the ragged stranger soundly for his carelessness. The king, the story goes, accepted the scolding humbly and in silence. Whether or not it is literally true, the tale captures something real about this moment. The King of Wessex, the last hope of free England, reduced to a nameless fugitive being shouted at by a peasant for burning her bread. But Alfred was not finished. He was planning. Through his secret messengers, he arranged for the loyal warriors of 3 counties of Wessex to gather on a chosen day in early May at a pre-arranged meeting place known as Egbert's Stone. And when the day came, they came. Men who had thought their king dead or fled emerged from hiding and rallied to him. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records that when Alfred appeared at the meeting place, the men of Wessex were overjoyed to see him, and a real army gathered around their king once more. Alfred led this army north, and at a place called Edington, he met Guthrum's Viking host in open battle. The fighting was hard, a brutal clash of shield walls, the 2 armies grinding against each other in the press of spears and axes. And Alfred won. The Viking army broke and fled, and Alfred pursued them, chasing the survivors back to their fortress and laying siege to it. After 2 weeks, starving and trapped, Guthrum surrendered. What Alfred did next reveals why he, and not some mere warrior, earned the title the Great. He did not slaughter his defeated enemy. Instead, he made peace, and he made it on extraordinary terms. Guthrum agreed not only to leave Wessex, but to convert to Christianity. A few weeks after the battle, the Viking warlord who had nearly destroyed England was baptized, with Alfred himself standing as his godfather, the 2 former enemies bound together in a new spiritual kinship. A treaty was eventually drawn up that divided the land between them, with the Vikings ruling the north and east, an area that would become known as the Danelaw, the region under Danish law, and Alfred holding Wessex and the lands to the south and west. Alfred had not driven the Vikings out of Britain. That was beyond his power. But he had stopped them. He had saved Wessex. He had ensured that there would remain a free, Christian Anglo-Saxon kingdom in Britain, and that kingdom would become the seed from which England itself would eventually grow. In the years that followed his victory, Alfred set about making sure his kingdom could never again be brought to the brink of destruction. He reorganized his army, creating a system in which half the warriors served while the other half stayed home to work the land, so that he always had a force ready to fight without ruining his kingdom's economy. He built a network of fortified towns called Burhs across Wessex, positioned so that no part of his kingdom was far from a stronghold where people could shelter and from which armies could sally out. Many of these Burhs grew into towns that still exist in England today. He built a fleet of ships to challenge the Vikings at sea, earning a reputation as a father of the English navy. And remarkably for a warrior king in this age, he poured enormous energy into reviving learning. He was appalled that literacy and scholarship had collapsed so badly during the Viking wars that almost no one in his kingdom could read Latin. He gathered scholars to his court, established schools, and personally translated or oversaw the translation of important Latin works into English so that his people could read them. He himself learned to read and write in middle age, driven by a genuine love of knowledge. He issued a comprehensive law code. He reformed his administration. He laid, in short, the foundations not just of a surviving Wessex, but of a unified English state. Alfred died in the year 899, around the age of 50, after a reign of nearly 30 years. He did not live to see England unified. That would be the work of his children and grandchildren, who would carry his vision forward, pushing back the Danelaw until Alfred's grandson could finally call himself King of all the English. But it all rested on what Alfred achieved in that one desperate year. Had Alfred been killed at Chippenham in January 878, or had he failed to rally his men, or had he lost the battle at Edington, there would have been no free Anglo-Saxon kingdom left in Britain. The whole island might have become a Norse realm. The English language, the English nation, English law, all might never have existed in anything like the forms we know. The entire future of England hung in the spring of 878 on a hunted fugitive in a swamp who refused to give up. That was the year England almost died, and the king who saved it. Alfred the Great, the scholarly youngest son who never expected to rule, who inherited a doomed kingdom, who was driven into the marshes and reduced to burning a peasant woman's bread, and who came back out of the swamp to win the battle that preserved a free England and to spend the rest of his life building a kingdom strong enough to survive. The kingdoms of the Anglo-Saxons would, within a few generations of his death, be forged into the single kingdom of England. The Vikings would be absorbed, defeated, and eventually replaced. The language Alfred fought to preserve and to teach would, 1,000 years later, become the most widely spoken language on earth. Of all the kings and queens in the long history of the English-speaking world, only one has ever been called the Great. And he earned it in a swamp in the winter of 878, when everything was lost and he won it all back.